Growing up, I was always a huge fan of the TMNT, the action figures, the TV series, you name it. But it seemed like whenever I got into a conversation with somebody about them, the topic that always came up was, what is a good TMNT game they haven't played before? And I know there were a few crap titles out there like the original TMNT on the NES, but one game in particular really stood out to me like treasure and trash heap. That one game in particular is TMNT on the Game Boy Advance. When I first received the game, I was amazed by it. The game looked, felt, and sounded just like the TV series. Like most TMNT games, this one is a classic beat-em-up that featured the ability to play as each turtle. Depending on which one you chose at the stage select screen triggered which story the turtle would follow. For example, if you chose Raphael, your story would involve Casey Jones, Raphael's masked vigilante friend. One thing that I always found kind of strange about the game was the cutscenes. When Raphael goes to punch Michelangelo, for example, there isn't any action. In fact, he just moves a few inches and you hear some punching noises. I mean, the game can show all sorts of violence involving the turtles beating the crap out of teenagers, but it can't show a measly punch in the cutscenes. And I always found the dialogue to be very irrelevant to the game. But what can I say, it's a Game Boy Advance game. The game features a variety of challenges that put the player in a 3D perspective. My favorite one is when you control Michelangelo as he skateboards in the sewer. Each turtle has their own special move, and you'd think they'd be directly stolen from Street Fighter. Raphael's is the Hurricane Kick, and Michelangelo's is the Flash Kick. I wouldn't be surprised to see Donatello pull off a Hadoken either. One problem with doing special moves is it takes part of your health. Can you imagine if that did that in Street Fighter? If you went to go do a Hadoken or something and it took part of your health? I guess it keeps the game from being too easy, but why include something as tempting to use in a video game? With that set aside, the game is awesome. Nothing can be more gratifying than beating the crap out of teenagers on the streets of New York. The controls are very fluent, and like most Game Boy Advance games, they're easy to pick upon. If I were to sum up the graphics and the soundtrack in one word, that word would be epic. It made me think I was actually watching the show. I really enjoyed how there's a different soundtrack for each stage, and they were all very well composed. The animations are flawless. Watching the turtles flip through the air really put me on the edge of my seat. Sure, this game has its moments, like for example, Act 3 of Raphael's mission is a racing stage, and it took me a good solid hour to beat Casey Jones and move on. The funny thing about this stage is it really reminds me of Excitebike, and how the game really made me want to rip my hair out. The game stays true to the TV series and has many villains we all know and love, such as Dr. Stockman and his Mousebots. I never really got into the newer series, but I don't think these lightsaber-wielding ninjas were in them. The game really reminded me of TMNT 2 on the NES. I won't go into much detail about that game now, but I will say some of the stages are very similar. The game is very exciting and the replayability is high with this one. If you're a fan of TMNT games, then this is a must-have for your collection. It is way better than the original TMNT game. And I know the graphics in the NES don't compare to the graphics of the Game Boy Advance, but the gameplay is there. So I'd like to conclude on TMNT for the Game Boy Advance being my favorite TMNT game. So, thanks for watching.